This is the human timeline, where history meets finance. Every civilization tells a story about what gives things value. Some say land, some say labor. America chose belief, the belief that tomorrow will pay for today. That belief has a name: credit. And credit became the beating heart of the United States. From birth, America owed someone money. The Revolutionary War left Congress broke and the soldiers unpaid. When Alexander Hamilton became the first Treasury Secretary in 1790, he didn't run from debt. He organized it. He bundled the state's obligations into one national promise, issued bonds, and vowed punctual interest. That idea did more than stabilize a young republic. It created a country built on trust and arithmetic. Fast forward 2 centuries, and that arithmetic runs everything. According to the Congressional Budget Office, by 2025, the U.S. owes roughly $35 trillion. Interest alone costs more than $600 billion a year, more than the education, housing, or transportation budgets combined. Yet markets stay calm because American debt is no longer a problem to solve. It's a product to sell. How did borrowing evolve from moral failure into the oxygen of modern prosperity? The answer lies in a long dance between labor, policy, and imagination. In early America, debt carried shame. Churches preached thrift. Bankruptcy meant social exile. But the Industrial Revolution needed credit more than virtue. Factories required capital long before profit arrived. Railroads and steel mills were built on borrowed hope. Each bond issue was a bet that the future would deliver on schedule. By the early 1900s, the federal government itself treated borrowing as patriotism. Bonds financed canals, railways, and finally war. During World War II, citizens lined up to buy war bonds, an act that turned national survival into a shared investment. After the war came the suburban revolution. Debt became domestic. Mortgages democratized ownership. The GI Bill extended education loans. Credit cards arrived in the 1950s, and by the 1980s, saving felt almost old-fashioned. The moral tone flipped. Credit was confidence. Household debt kept rising, and with it came a quiet redefinition of work. Once you worked to buy, now you borrowed to work, the job existed to pay interest. The Federal Reserve reports household debt above $17 trillion in 2025, nearly double the federal government's annual revenue. The average family carries a mortgage, a car loan, and revolving credit that together cost more than their grandparents' entire home. Corporations caught on. The 1980s leveraged buyout boom turned debt into a weapon. Borrow billions, buy companies, cut costs, flip profits. Workers lost pensions. Executives gained golden parachutes. By the 21st century, borrowing had become America's common language, from Capitol Hill to Main Street. Government debt funded tax cuts. Corporations borrowed for stock buybacks. Families financed lifestyles that wages alone could no longer support. Every layer of the economy leaned on another's obligation. Treasury securities, once sleepy savings bonds, became the backbone of world finance. Japan, China, and global funds hold trillions in U.S. debt. Not because they love America's politics, but because they trust its math. Each bond is a certificate of faith in tomorrow's taxpayer. Beneath that stability, though, work lost its moral primacy. Productivity rose, wages stagnated, and the difference was filled with credit. Labor no longer dictated dignity. Repayment did. Credit scores replaced reputation. You don't have to build things to belong. You just have to make your payments on time. This raises an uncomfortable question. If the system rewards borrowing more than saving, what is work actually worth? Since the 1970s, inflation-adjusted wages have barely budged while productivity doubled. Profit didn't vanish. It migrated. Interest became ambition's substitute. Silicon Valley startups launched with venture debt. College degrees came with loans attached. Even emergencies, health, housing, or hardware, became subscription plans for survival. Every hour worked now feeds a pyramid of interest obligations to landlords, lenders, and investors. Time itself is monetized. The economy doesn't just redistribute income, it redistributes hours of life. According to the GAO, interest payments will soon surpass defense spending. America now spends more renting its past than building its future. Yet investors smile, because as long as the U.S. keeps owing, the world keeps functioning. U.S. Treasuries are the global benchmark. The deeper the debt, the safer investors feel. Then inflation came back like an old ghost. After years of near-zero rates, the Federal Reserve hiked above 5%. Borrowing costs doubled. Mortgage applications collapsed. Tech firms that thrived on cheap money imploded. Still, policymakers called it a sign of strength. The patient has a heartbeat. If debt is the heartbeat, what happens when it stops? When economies stall, central banks act like doctors with defibrillators. In 2008, then again in 2020, Washington's answer to crisis was the same: borrow. The Fed created trillions, buying bonds, cutting rates to zero. The intent was simple: growth must not die. The 2020 pandemic response was the largest peacetime borrowing spree in history, over $4 trillion in 1 year. Stimulus checks, small business aid, and corporate rescue packages kept the lights on. It worked, briefly. By 2022, demand roared back faster than supply, inflation hit 40-year highs, and the cure became the cause. Debt had become both medicine and disease. Borrowing kept society alive while changing its DNA. People no longer borrowed to build, they borrowed to stand still. Sociologists call it the financialization of everyday life. Nearly every digital interaction now passes through a financial gateway. Work itself is collateral. The gig economy made the pattern visible. Platforms promised freedom, delivered volatility. Drivers finance their cars. Creators finance their cameras. The independence of self-employment rests on the bondage of monthly payments. Societies once tied citizenship to property. Now they tie it to credit. You don't need land, you need a score. A high FICO rating opens more doors than a good resume. The national motto might as well read, "In credit we trust." Power shifted accordingly. In the industrial age, workers could strike. In the credit age, you can't strike against interest rates. The protest line moved from factory gates to the Fed's press conferences. The Federal Reserve became the high priest of modern faith. Its true product is confidence. Confidence, however, is fragile. In 2023, several mid-sized banks collapsed after mismanaging rate risk. Depositors panicked. Regulators intervened overnight. Each rescue confirmed the same rule: debt may wobble, but it won't be allowed to fall. The lender of last resort is now the first responder. Numbers alone don't capture the story. $35 trillion in federal obligations, $17 trillion in households, $12 trillion in corporations. But numbers aren't the story. Belief is. The economy no longer expands by producing goods. It expands by producing trust. Economists call this endogenous money creation. Loans create deposits. Deposits create spending. Spending invites more loans. It's economic perpetual motion fueled by faith. Faith is finite. Each generation must decide whether to keep believing. When young workers see rents soaring and interest eating their wages, faith weakens. That exhaustion explains why opposite movements, crypto evangelists and debt relief activists, share the same mood: escape from the credit treadmill. Globally, the treadmill never stops. The IMF estimates world debt above $310 trillion triple the planet's GDP. 40% is in dollars. Even critics of U.S. policy keep buying treasuries because they need the collateral. The system runs on borrowed certainty. This is the exorbitant privilege of the dollar, the power to issue IOUs the world accepts as currency. it's also the temptation that prevents reform. Why fix what everyone still buys? So leaders raise the ceiling, markets exhale, and the can rolls on. Debt is democracy's compromise, an IOU to future voters who can't yet complain. Every cycle ends in reinvention, not collapse. Britain reinvented trade after its debts. America reinvented productivity after World War II. The next reinvention may redefine work itself. Automation severs labor from income. Machines generate value without earning wages. Who, then, services the debt that funds them? Governments respond with subsidies and credits, borrowing to replace payroll. We're entering an era where debt funds existence as much as investment. Finance loves a good story, and today's is optimism. Soft landing. Resilient consumer? Goldilocks economy. Each phrase sustains market faith. Skepticism costs money. Belief pays dividends. Still, history warns that belief always needs renewal. Enron, Lehman, FTX. The cast changes, the plot repeats. Society promises restraint, forgets, and borrows again. Memory fades faster than debt. Economists joke that civilization runs on leverage because nobody can pay cash for their mistakes. The joke hides a truth. Debt is time travel. It lets us borrow from tomorrow to fix today. Whether that's wisdom or hubris depends on how long tomorrow keeps showing up. If tomorrow stopped, we'd rediscover thrift the hard way. But tomorrow keeps paying the minimum due. The United States auctions bonds daily. Investors keep buying. The system hums, louder than ever. Every paycheck, every card swipe, every law passed adds another line to the same program. The miracle isn't that it works, it's that people still believe it will. Trust is the invisible asset that makes paper valuable. Since 1971, the dollar has been backed not by gold, but by credibility. Lose that, and the math collapses. So far, the story still sells, but every story needs revision. Inside Washington, debt ceilings are ritual theater. Politicians argue over morality while markets watch interest rates. According to the GAO, about 8 cents of every tax dollar now pays interest. Within a decade, it may be 12. That isn't ruin, but it is revelation. We're paying to delay choices. Households feel the same fatigue. Wages lag, automation spreads, and credit fills the gap. Student loans exceed $1.7 trillion. Home prices outpace income. Financial apps teach serenity instead of solvency. Mindful spending replaces meaningful reform. We treat stress as inevitable, like interest itself. Globally, others copy the model. Europe funds welfare with deficits, China builds infrastructure on credit, and developing nations borrow in dollars to imitate prosperity. Debt, says the IMF, now binds the planet tighter than trade ever did. So here's the thought experiment. Imagine a debt-free America. No mortgages, no bonds, no loans. At first, freedom, then paralysis. Pension funds vanish, capital dries up, the government can't pay salaries. Money itself disappears, because every dollar is someone else's IOU. Debt didn't replace work by mistake, it replaced it because it had to. Industrial capacity outgrew wages. Borrowing filled the space between potential and affordability. It turned idle possibility into motion. That's both the genius and the trap. The challenge ahead isn't mathematical, it's moral. How do we make sure that motion serves people instead of the other way around? Maybe that's why this channel exists, to remind us that balance sheets are biographies. Behind every $1 trillion lies 1 trillion hours of human labor, 1 trillion acts of belief. When we say the nation owes $35 trillion, we're also saying the nation still believes in a future. Debt, at its best, is imagination made tangible, a bridge between today's limits and tomorrow's hopes. At its worst, it's a trapdoor disguised as a bridge. The difference depends on honesty and memory. So as markets rise and headlines warn, remember, we're not just counting money. We're measuring faith. And faith, like credit, renews only when people pay attention. This is The Human Timeline, where history meets finance. Subscribe for more stories that turn numbers into narratives, policies into people, and debt into the language of belief that built the modern world.